Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez, Application Engineer here at KETIV Technologies. So happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully, everyone has had a pretty productive week. Again, if you guys are new to the channel, thank you guys for tuning in as well. Just a quick overview of what Fusion Fridays are, right? So it's a series of webinars where we really like to go into depth into all the environments that Fusion 360 has to offer. So that could be anything from really the modeling workspace to surface modeling, a little bit of rendering as well, and of course, CAM. So again, we do have a YouTube channel. If you guys aren't familiar with that, we tend to post all of our webinars into that YouTube channel. So again, if you missed some of the topics that we covered, maybe you guys missed a few, picks and clicks that we were making. Feel free to go into the YouTube channel, search up KETIV /AVA, and you will find most of those videos already uploaded to YouTube. So again, for today, we are going to be covering CAM patterns inside of Fusion 360. So that is a topic that I typically get once or twice a week. And there's usually just one option in there that tends to trick people inside of that command, right? So hopefully after today, that clears up some confusion. And if you guys aren't using CAM inside of Fusion 360, this is going to be a great way to really give you an introduction to that topic and see how that workflow looks like inside of the software here. So again, feel free to ask any questions. We do want to keep this as interactive as possible. Again, any questions that come up, maybe you missed something or something isn't really clear, feel free to ask questions down there in the chat box. All right, so as always, we do like to start off with the why to these webinars, right? So the why to this webinar in specific is going to be how to understand the CAM pattern command, right? So again, like I mentioned, a lot of people do get confused specifically with one option in there. It's pretty straightforward once you really start understanding what those different options or different commands mean. And then, of course, you can start seeing the different patterns that Fusion 360 has to offer as well, right? So we are going to be working with a few parts, not necessarily that are too complex, but it is going to show a good range of how to use those patterns in specific. It's also going to make your programming more efficient, right? So again, instead of programming each part individually, maybe you have some sort of symmetric part or you have multiple components that you're trying to machine. Use the CAM patterns, take advantage of it, and just program the part once, use the pattern, and then let the machine run after that. And of course, repeatability is a major key in manufacturing. Now, what I mean by that is the more interaction you have with the part, meaning the more work offsets, right? The more work setups that you have, the higher your chances are of making some sort of mistake or just not being consistent with your part manufacturing. Again, the patterns take advantage of that by just programming the part once, patterning that specific pattern itself or the toolpath, and then just going all across the board with those 5-6 components that you have laid out on your machine. All right, so here are some of the few pattern types that we have inside of the CAM environment for Fusion 360. The most common one and the most typical one that people use is the linear pattern. Linear pattern is what you would see right there on the bottom right. You have a component. Again, it's all going to be the same, but you're going to be trying to make, 4 parts in this case out of that single stock. And you're going to just try to machine those 4 parts using that pattern command inside of Fusion 360, right? So again, it's pretty straightforward. The linear pattern type, again, it can either go horizontal or vertical. Similar to your sketch patterns, right? So a lot of people are familiar with the sketch patterns. Think of the toolpath pattern as something similar to that. Next, you have the circular pattern type. Circular pattern type is pretty straightforward as well. You pick an axis and then it essentially creates a pattern around that axis, and also in whatever given instances you gave it. Mirror, again, it mirrors that toolpath about a plane. And the duplication pattern, which a lot of people aren't too familiar with. So the duplication is essentially a component pattern. The only difference is that duplication you're able to do it when you're not in an assembly, sort of say, right? So again, I'll kind of demonstrate that. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense down the line here. And then component pattern, again, if you have an assembly, right? So if you have multiple components inside of that parent file inside of Fusion 360, you are going to get this component pattern type. Otherwise, if you just have multiple bodies, you aren't going to see that component type, right? So that's what throws off a lot of people as well. They don't see the component pattern type, and that's the reason why, because they don't have multiple components in there. All right, so this is actually one of the options inside of the pattern type that tends to kind of throw off people a little bit. The first one is the preserve order, right? So when you're creating that pattern type, it's going to ask you, okay, how do you want to keep the toolpaths that you patterned in order, right? So again, the first one is going to be preserve order. Preserve order is pretty straightforward. So notice here on the left, we have a 2D contour, we have a drilling toolpath, and again, a 3D adaptive toolpath, right? What's going to happen here is it's going to create the 2D contour toolpath, right? Once you post it out, then it's going to drill, and then it's going to do that 3D adaptive, right? So it's going to keep that order, and then it's going to transition over to the next component that you pattern to. So again, pretty straightforward. Now the order by operation, it's essentially going to do a 2D contour, right? It sees that you have another component that you pattern to, so it's going to do that same 2D contour for that next component. Notice in this case I only had 2, so after you finish with those 2D contours, then it's going to go over to the drilling operations and so on and so forth, right? So again, it's essentially machining that toolpath for all the instances that you have patterned. Now here's the trickier one here a little bit, right? So the order by tool. Now again, this doesn't normally happen. You normally wouldn't do this the way that I have it, right? So notice again, looking at the left, I have a tool 17 machining a 2D contour. And then my third toolpath is the 3D adaptive, right? And then it's also going to be using tool 17. So if we look at order by tool, if we select that option and post it out, notice what it's going to do, right? So it's going to still essentially do a order by operation. So it's going to do a 2D contour. It's going to do another 2D contour. And then it's going to jump over and do the 3D adaptive toolpath, right? So instead of doing the drilling operation, it essentially reordered my toolpath here. And again, what that does is it minimizes the tool changes. Now, oftentimes that may be a good thing, but maybe you have a specific toolpath that has to go in a specific order. And if you select order by tool and it rearranges your toolpaths, you might be in a little bit of trouble, right? So you want to look out for that. Again, if you guys are taking my opinion on this, I typically like to keep it at order by operation, typically because again, that's what you're looking for, right? So you want to machine that 2D contour for all the parts, and then jump over to the next toolpath, and then do the same thing there. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And again, for the scenario today, we are going to be essentially creating a pattern, right? So we have one part, we have a given stock size. And we're going to be asked to machine as many parts as possible that fit inside of that stock itself, right? So let's go ahead and dive into Fusion 360 and take a look at how that looks like. Again, ask questions, guys. We do want to keep it as as interactive as possible. I do get a little bored over here, when you guys don't have any questions. So ask questions, talk to me, and let me know if you guys missed something here. All right, so let's go to Fusion. As always, we are going to be starting off in the modeling workspace, right? So if you guys are new to this interface, again, if you want to switch over to CAM, all you really have to do is just hit the drop down and select the CAM environment, right? So again, you don't need to download any add-in. You don't need to really download a separate part of the software. It's all going to be integrated into Fusion 360, right? So essentially just being that one platform for all your designers or engineers or even machinists, right? So again, multiple workspaces to select from here. Again, we have created videos on these other topics, so feel free to just kind of look through those. Over here on the left, we have our data panel. So this is where you're going to store all your projects. The way I like to work inside of the data panel is just by customer, right? So we have a few customers that I've worked with here. Notice that I've created a new project for each and every one of those customers. Reason being is if I just had one single project and, so let's say Alex's Fusion 360 projects, right? So I have a few different, you can do subfolders in here, but the thing with subfolders is you can't invite, specific people to those subfolders. Now, what I mean by that is if I go over here to the top, notice that it says people. I don't have anyone invited to my personal projects, right? But you do have the ability to invite other people to your projects, right? So again, that's eliminating the need to really send out emails, set up a Dropbox, and start storing all your data in there. Just invite people to your project, right? So again, the reason with this though is if you invite them to your project, they're gonna have access to all these different subfolders and folders over here, right? So you want to be a little bit conscious of who you're inviting, where you're inviting them to. Again, if you just want to share maybe one single part, just go ahead and create a new project, right? Create a new project, store that part in there, and then invite them to that specific project itself. So again, that's why I like to typically just separate customers with each individual project over here. As we scroll down as well, we have the CAM samples, right? So again, that's also going to be very beneficial to you guys. We have design samples, simulation samples. Maybe you just want to start expanding your toolbox a little bit. Dig into some of these samples, figure out what the Autodesk employees are doing and their workflow for creating some of these samples, and start familiarizing yourself with these other environments inside of Fusion 360, right? So again, you guys have tons of opportunity here. Take advantage of that, right? Okay, so that was enough spiel on the data panel there. Let's go ahead and focus on the part. So again, we are going to be given a, let's say, a stock size that's going to be 16 inches in length, right? Reason why I started off in the modeling workspace is just to create a sketch of kind of the bounding box that I'm going to be working with, right? So if we go ahead and turn on the visibility here, notice that I kind of sketched out the stock itself, right? So if I double click on this, you can see that I have it all laid out, right? So 16 inches in length. I wanted to make sure that I had some decent spacing here on the sides just to give me enough material to clear out. And again, these parts are going to be made out of, I don't know, some sort of plastic, right? So again, let's go ahead and keep that in mind while we're machining this part. So again, we already have it laid out. What you can do too, it's not really necessary, is I did create a pattern of the body itself. So if we go over here, hit the drop down for the bodies, stop the sketch here. Notice that I do have some of the bodies created, right? So again, giving you a better visual for how it's going to look like inside of your stock. Again, this isn't necessary if you guys know exactly what the spacing is going to be between each component. Just feel free to jump right into the CAM environment, right? Okay, so we have everything here. I'm gonna go ahead and hide these because we don't necessarily need them. Turn off the sketch here. And again, as easy as just jumping into the CAM environment, right? So this is a pretty simple part. It's not gonna really take too long to program. But again, the main focus for this webinar is going to be the patterns, right? So keep that in mind while we're programming here, right? So again, if you guys aren't familiar with the CAM environment, the workflow that we're going to follow is extremely intuitive, right? So again, we're going to go from left to right, starting off with our setup, adding a few toolpaths, drilling, and again, multi-axis. If you guys have Ultimate, turning, 2D profile, and then you're going to simulate the toolpaths, right? So again, giving you that peace of mind before you post out to your machine. You want to make sure that you don't have any collisions, right, or unexpected movements when you actually post out that program. And then, of course, the last step here is going to be post-process. Over here on the right, you do have a couple options here, right? So you can do your tool library, and again, this is always going to be the first step when it comes to starting off with CAM. is set up your tool library. Set it up to exactly the tools that you have at your shop. And just don't waste time really fidgeting around with some of the downloaded tools that Fusion 360 already has. And then you have a couple add-ins, right? So you can go over here to the Fusion 360 App Store if you wanted to, and check them out. See, if there's maybe an app that can benefit you guys. So again, like I mentioned, first step in this workflow is going to be a setup, right? So if you weren't familiar with machining, just hover over that command and take a look at what it's telling you to do. So in this case, it's saying, okay, you can specify the work coordinate system, which is what we want. Specify the stock geometry, fixtures, and the machining surfaces, right? So that sounds pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and start off with our setup. Okay, so everything here looks good. The only thing is our stock size, right? So again, by default, it is going to jump to a relative size box. Now, relative size box, what that means is you can specify some sort of offset, right? So in this case, 40 thousandths, and it gives you a minimum based off of the parameters that you have set over here on the top. Again, we already know our stock size, so let's go ahead and choose a fixed size box. Right. So in this case, it's not going to be 3.5. It's going to be 16 inches. The depth is going to be 2 1/4. The height is going to be fine at 1.5. So notice what happens as well, right? So it always keeps our body or our component right in the center of the stock, right? So reason being is if we look at the model position, it's automatically set to center. Good thing is that we can change that, right? So we can offset from the left side, which is a -X, offset from the right, which is a +X, right? So in this case, I want to offset from the -X, right? And then notice that it didn't change anything, but that's because we have some sort of a value already preset into the offset. I can just change that to be 1/4 inch, somewhere around there. Okay. And then if we kind of look at the front view here, notice that it's doing the same thing for our Z-axis here, right? Or the height of it. So again, we can go ahead and change that offset from the +Z, change that to be 50 thousandths, right? And hit OK. All right. So once again, if we have our setup highlighted, right? So that's always going to be pretty important option here as well, right? You can always go to just click on your setup, shows you a preview of the stock, and it also shows you where your work coordinate system is going to be at. Now, let's say, I didn't like where the work coordinate system was at. Now, I find a lot of people, what they do is they're like, oh, okay, now I have to go ahead and, click setup, go to my stock size, fixed size box. No, you don't have to do any of that. You can just right click on setup 2, select edit. Let's say in this case, we wanted to go from the top left corner here. You just go ahead and click OK, and it automatically changed that to the top left corner, right? So again, take advantage of the editing setups and the editing toolpaths. Again, you're not just limited to doing it once, and then if you mess up, restarting all over. So then after this, first step would probably be just facing off the top of the stock here, just getting a nice clean surface. So let's go ahead and use that facing operation then. If we hit the 2D toolpath dropdown, notice that I have all the 2D toolpaths here. I also have the facing operation. Notice that the little icon matches the icon on the top, right? So I can always just click on the icon and it automatically defaults to a facing operation. Now in this case, I would probably want to select a some sort of a face mill, a shell mill. Double click on that, and it auto populates our feeds and speeds from our tool library, right? So this is what I mean by just making sure that you have your tool library set up. Again, have different libraries, right, for different materials, for your plastics, for your aluminums, for your steel, and then have those feeds and speeds already set up, right? So that way you don't have to come in here, make changes. Maybe you want to bring this up a little bit, 75 inches per minute. Just have that already set up so that you don't spend time doing this, but spend more time actually programming some of the toolpaths. Now, the nice thing about the facing operation is that you just select the tool and you just click OK, right? So you don't really have to really do much with the tool path, unless you maybe wanted to face, a little bit lower for whatever reason of the top of the model. One thing I do like to do is going back to the facing operation, and then just extending the pass extension over here, right? So maybe you want to go, I don't know, half the tool diameter, right? So in this case, it's going to be 1.5. What you can do is if, for whatever reason you didn't remember the actual expression, you can always just type in tool diameter. I believe it's this one. Yeah, so you can do tool diameter and then just divide that by 2, and it gives you that pass extension of the radius essentially, right? So here you can see, have a better look at what's going on, right? So you're clearing the part, nice, and then it's finishing somewhere over here, also clearing the part as well, right? So nice thing about this too is that you can go back to the tool path, and now every time you select the facing operation, it's always going to be half the tool diameter, right? So I can edit the expression, right? So right now it's set to tool diameter divided by 2. So no matter what the tool diameter is, it's always going to take the radius of that, right? So I can always right click and I can say make default, right? So now instead of having to go into the facing operation every time and trying to figure that out, it's always going to keep half of the tool diameter there for the pass extension, right? Again, we offset it 50 thousandths, so that's going to be, that's a good value for the facing operation or for the face tool path to take off. If that was a little bit too much of an aggressive cut, I can always do multiple depths. Right. I'm going to be fine with that. All right, so there's our facing operation. Next step would probably be to some way to kind of contour this this outside shape, right? Because again, we want multiple parts. So we want to make sure that we cut out the shape, flip it over, and then face off the top hat essentially, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Something that I would use is probably the 2D contour toolpath. So let's go ahead and hit the drop down there. Again, this workflow is going to be the same, right? So whether you're doing 2D toolpaths, 3D toolpaths, even fourth and fifth axis toolpaths, right? You're always going to see this workflow. So starting off with your tool, selecting geometry, right? So which profile do you want to cut? Heights, controlling the depth of the tool. The passes tab is going to be, how much of an aggressive cut do you want to take, controlling both your step over and your step down of the tool. And then finally, the linking tab here at the end, right? So again, starting off with our tool. What's nice about this too is that it does remember the last tool that you selected, right? So it automatically just leaves it in there. In this case, I don't want that shell mill. I'm going to use this 1/4 inch flat end mill. All right. And then notice if I were to do the same thing that I did with the facing operation, right? If I click OK, it's going to ask for a contour that I want to machine. Hit OK. I want to go ahead and select this contour here on the bottom. Now, also another thing that I find a lot of people doing is, they will probably click this top selection. Now, again, the best practice would be to select the contour of where you want the bottom of the tool to be at, right? So keep that in mind when selecting contours. In this case, I want the tool to reach the bottom of this contour, right? So that's why I want to select this bottom edge. If I wanted to machine, for whatever reason, this contour over here, then that's when I would select this top edge on the top of the model. In this case, though, I just want to select this bottom contour. And let's go ahead and click OK, see what we get, right? Hit setup. That's another thing too. You can simulate toolpaths individually, or if you click on setup too, right, it's going to highlight essentially everything that's underneath it, and we can go ahead and simulate that toolpath, right? In the simulation dialog box, you can turn on the toolpath. You can have a couple options here, right? I typically like to leave it set to tail. You can have the stock here and then just play that. So there's our facing operation. And then there's our contour operation, right? So again, this is going to be plastic, but still that's going to be too much of an aggressive cut there. So more than likely you'll probably break that tool, especially with the stick out here. So something that I would do is probably use some sort of ramping as we're going down, right? So what I would do is I would go back to the toolpath, right? So again, you have the liberty to really make edits here. So again, that's going to be found under linking. And notice that towards the middle over here, you have that ramp option, right? So you have an option to, set some sort of degree and then set the maximum step down. And again, these are going to be values that you set yourself, right? So something that's worked for you in the past, or maybe it might be trial and error, right? This might be the first time that you're trying it. So this is, these are values that you may have to kind of figure out the hard way, right? So in this case, I want to leave them default. I don't really want to make any changes there. And that should be it, right? So now if I go ahead and click OK, notice that I get a much better toolpath, right? So the red, again, is going to indicate ramp or some sort of ramping movement. Yellow is going to be your rapid. And then blue is going to be, the actual feed or it's actually feeding into the part. Now, of course, it's feeding up here as well, but it's ramping. So ramping takes priority over that blue feed color, right? So again, that's a much better toolpath. So I'm going to be okay with this. Next thing would probably be, let's try to focus on the drilling operation here. So again, I can go set a drilling operation. Again, I didn't, I modeled this maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So I forgot what the hole size was. I can always just hover over that hole size and it gives me the diameter for that specific hole. Right. So now I know that it's an 1/8 of an inch drill. Again, going to the tool select option and starting off with that 1/8 of an inch drill. Right. Clicking OK. Next tab over is the geometry tab. Which hole do we want to machine? We want to machine this hole. And we have a couple options here as well, right? So we have the select same diameter, order by depth, right? So we have a few options here. Hit select same diameter and it automatically picks that we have the same diameter there, right? So what you can do too is maybe set some sort of a range, right? So it's always going to drill between 1/8 of an inch holes and 1/4 inch holes. So you can also, do by range as well if you wanted to. In this case, I'm going to be fine with that. Another thing to note, right, is look at where that green line is going to be at, right? So it looks like it's going to plunge, right? So again, yellow is going to be rapid, and it's going to rapid up to like maybe to the top of that face there, right? If we go to heights and we look at top height, right? So right now it's set to the whole top. The only problem is that the top of the hole that we selected is going to be that bottom of the counterbore, right? In this case, we can go ahead and set that to model top. So now it brings that up a little bit, right? So that's going to be much better for us. And nice thing about the drilling operation too is that it shows you or it gives you a nice preview of what's happening here, right? So again, the tip is going to the bottom of the hole, but we want to make sure that we drill tip through the bottom. Make sure that we clear that by, I don't know, 50 thousandths or so. And the last tab over is going to be the cycle tab. So what kind of drilling operation are we focusing on? In this case, we want to do some sort of chip breaking, right? or peck drilling. Again, the red is indicating the little red arrow over here on the top. That's where it's going to start off, right? So it's going to go here, next hole over here, and then it's going to go and make its way around, right? I'm going to be okay with that and hit OK. All right, so now moving along this part, next operation would probably be these counterboards here, right? So once again, I can do a drilling operation, select all these holes, play around with the heights. But what I can do is already have all that selected in this toolpath. So let's go ahead and just duplicate that drilling operation, right? So you can either right click on it and you can select duplicate, right? Notice what's next to this command here as well, though, Control D. That's indicating to me that that's going to be the hotkey for that command. So I can select that toolpath, hit Control D, and it automatically duplicated that toolpath. Right, so I can go to this bottom one and I can edit that. So now, again, what diameter was that? So that's 3/8. So let's go ahead and use a 3/8 flat end mill, right? Because it's going to be a counter bore. In this case, I don't have it in my tool library. So what I can do is I can go to the samples tool library, right? So here you have a couple options here: inch aluminum, inch brass, inch bronze. Notice that we also have inch plastics, right? So these are all the same tool libraries, or they contain the same tools. The only thing that's changing is the feeds and speeds for each of those tools, right? So again, we're going to be using that 3/8 inch flat end mill. Select that tool, hit OK. Again, we're getting a preview of what's going on here. We don't want to go that deep, so let's go to the heights. All right, so top height, model top is fine. The bottom height, what we can do is make that a selection, right? So you want to select where the bottom of the tool is going to go to, which is what we want, right? So let's go ahead and select selection, select that face, and we get the preview to show accordingly, right? So that's much better there. Last thing we want to change on this toolpath is the cycle, right? So we just want to plunge. We don't want to do any kind of peck drilling there. And then hit OK. All right. So really the last step here would probably be to take care of this little feature here, right? This little channel. Couple options. You can do a sketch. Maybe you want to sketch on this, right? But then again, you have to control the height of the ball end mill. You might have to control, whether it's going to be left or right compensation. So there's a lot of options that you can select. Really, the best option that comes to mind for me would be the pencil toolpath, right? So let's go to 3D toolpaths, right? So again, we're not limited to just working with either strict 2D toolpaths or only 3D toolpaths, right? So you can mix and match here, and whatever gets the job done, right? So in this case, pencil toolpath. Again, if you guys weren't familiar with the pencil toolpath, that's also one of the recommendations that I always make to people is just hover over these toolpaths and read the description that comes up, right? So again, this is, the contour, best strategy for finishing steep walls, but can also be used for semi-finish, right? So that way, whenever you do have parts come up, you're not there kind of scrambling and looking for toolpaths. You already have a nice idea of, okay, the contour toolpath is going to be a good toolpath for this feature. So instead of spending time researching online, just read the descriptions here and kind of figure out what the toolpath best applies to. So in this case, again, we want to focus on the pencil toolpath. Let's go ahead and select that. And the tool that we're going to use is going to be that 3/4 inch ball, which is tool number 3 right here. Double click on that. And again, what's nice about the pencil toolpath is that it automatically picks up any fillets or anywhere where this specific tool can go into, and it just tries to machine that specific feature, right? So in this case, we have a 3/4 inch ball. We have a 3/4 inch essentially fillet here, or channel. So let's go ahead and click OK, right? So it gave us that toolpath without really having to make much selections. And then, so from here, notice also what's going on, right? So it's going to be plunging straight down into that center wall there, right? So what we can do is a couple options, right? So let's see if that pencil toolpath, first off, has an option to kind of extend that, right? So if we go to geometry, we see that we have additional offset. Really additional offset though, if you take a look at that, it kind of expands the entire boundary. So that's not what we want. We just want it to really just extend in one direction. So this isn't going to be much help to us. Let's see the passes tab. Link from inside to outside, over thickness, that's not going to help. Step over, it's not helping either. Linking tab, this is going to be our last resort here. So we have horizontal lead and radius, right? So we just have essentially just radii to kind of mess around with, but we don't have a solid vertical line or vertical extension, I mean horizontal extension to kind of drive this toolpath. So let's go ahead and click OK. So this is where we go to the patch environment, right? So also known as kind of surfaces, right, or surface environment. What we can do here is essentially just create a shell of this feature, right? So a shell with a 0 thickness. So let's go ahead and do that, right? So create offset. What do we want to offset? We want to offset this specific feature, and it's going to be important to keep that 0, right? If we were to hit 10,000s, 15,000s, whatever, that's going to give us some incorrect toolpaths, right? So keep that to 0, hit OK. Now what we can do is we can go to modify, and we can go to extend, right? And then we can do some sort of an extension there, right? So our tool diameter is 3/4 of an inch, right? So you can do either 0.75 if you wanted to go the entire, the entire length, but that may be a little bit too much. Again, we don't want to waste too much time as we're kind of just plunging down and cutting errors. So just divide that by 2, 0.375, right? And now it gives us that nice little surface here, right? So now if we go to cam, we hit regenerate. Notice that all of our toolpaths had some sort of red exclamation mark, right? So that was indicating to me or indicating to the software that, hey, there was some sort of change either made in the model environment or the patch environment. Again, go ahead and make sure that you regenerate all these toolpaths, and you have the latest update for that toolpath. So that's why that happens. A lot of people don't like that. So what you can do is you can right click on the toolpath, hit protect, and it's that's going to really avoid just regenerating that toolpath over and over. You do want to make sure that you unprotect that toolpath though, because if you post it out while it's protected, again, you may have made a change and you weren't aware of that affected that toolpath, and you're just going to post out with that old protected toolpath. So let's take a look at the pencil toolpath. And notice what's going on, right? So it still didn't take into account that extra surface that we created. So reason being is that we go back to that toolpath. We have this model override checkbox, right? So if we check on that, it's asking for the override surface. In this case, it's going to be this surface that we created. Hit OK. And now it gave us that nice little extension there, right? So I can go back to the bodies. I can hide that. We don't need that anymore. And call it a day, right? So now if we go ahead and simulate this real quick, hit play, right? So we can see that going on. And then we can see the ramp, drilling operations. And we also noticed that it plunged down into the center of that, right? So a couple options that you can do from here. You can go back to that toolpath, select edit, passes. One of them is inside out. For some reason, sometimes it does get a little confused here. Well, you can try two. Let's see if this one works. We can set the entry position. So we go to body, turn that body back on. Right, so we set entry position to be the outside there. Notice that it gave us that correct plunge, right? So again, it's telling you that was a nice thing about simulating, right? So if I would have just posted out like that, we would have probably done some damage to the tool itself, right? So I have a comment here from Nico's. It looks like I had a 50 thou height for my 3/8 inch flat end mill, right? So I did. Thank you for that. Let me go back to edit. Heights. You can just turn off drill tip to the bottom here, right? And then hit OK there. All right. So we're pretty much done with the programming on this part, right? So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and pattern this specific or these toolpaths to kind of give us the rest of the objects here, right? So again, notice that you don't need the other components in here. You can just go ahead and pattern that or pattern these toolpaths and just give it the amount of instances that you essentially need. So that's going to be the first step, is going to be selecting the toolpaths that you want to pattern. Again, we don't want to pattern the face because it already gave us a nice, nice clean facing operation there. We want to start off with that 2D contour though. Hold shift on your keyboard and it selects the entire range in between those two toolpaths or those two selections, right? Now the option for that is going to be over here on the top. So let's go ahead and select pattern. In this case, it's going to be a linear pattern, right? Direction 1 is going to be along that axis. Now, again, that's also going to be pretty important, right? So you want to make sure that that is a straight line or a straight axis. If you weren't sure, you can just go ahead and turn on your origin over here, and then you could have just selected that axis there, right? And then we're going to flip the direction, right? Because we want to go in this way. And then the spacing for direction 1. In this case, I believe it's going to be 4. Number of instances, it's going to be 4. And again, notice that you can do an additional direction, right? So if you maybe had a bigger piece of stock, right, you can do an additional direction. So in this case, do some sort of like a bi-direction, and then say that you wanted to do 4 inches as well. And notice that you have essentially those two patterns, right? In this case, I don't want to do that. So I want to turn that off. I just want to keep these 4 components here. I do want to keep the original pattern or the original toolpaths. I don't want to reverse the order, right? So I don't want to start off over here and work my way back. I want to start off on this first component. And then the order or the operation order, right? So these are the options that I was talking about in the PowerPoint. Again, I want to keep the order by operation for me. This is going to work just fine. Hit OK. And now what we can do is simulate that, right? So again, if we were to just click on pattern, it's just going to simulate this pattern itself. I want to go ahead and simulate setup 2. Hit simulate over here and just let it run. Right? You can kind of increase the speed here. Okay, so that gives us pretty much the entire patterns there, right? So now what we can do, again, depending on the work holding that you have for the second operation, you can either do some sort of, I know a lot of people use like glue and tape to kind of fixture that. You can do some sort of vacuum holding as well, right? And then just machine off that top hat. These little columns here, we don't really care about because again, they don't, they're already outside of the stock, so we don't care about those. But yeah, that pretty much covers the patterns here, right? So again, that's how you would essentially create a pattern when you have a given stock length and you have multiple parts that you want to create from that, right? So I did mention the duplication pattern as well. So let's see if we can cover that as well, right? So let me go ahead and select these toolpaths here as well. Again, so if we go to pattern, notice that I don't have that component pattern option, right? So again, we don't have components here. We have multiple bodies, right? So that's why you don't see that option there. But what we do have, though, is that duplication. Again, so now it's asking for the source. Usually, if you guys are familiar with the component pattern, you're able to just select that specific component, right? With the duplication pattern, though, it's a little bit different. It's asking you for a source sketch or a source point. So in this case, just pick a point somewhere on the initial source, and then make sure that you match that on the target, right? And then again, you have these same options here. Click OK, and now you have that essentially that duplication, right, of toolpaths. So again, it's a little bit confusing at times. I don't know why you wouldn't just be able to do a body pattern, if you will. But yeah, that's essentially how the duplication tab works with. And that covers the patterns for today, right? So let me go back to our PowerPoint here. Again, just a quick summary. So again, kind of walk you through how to verify the stock size and the part spacing. Again, I started off in the model workspace, and that's because it just makes things a little bit easier to visualize. If you already know the exact spacing and the exact stock size and how many parts are going to fit into that stock, by all means, just skip that step and go straight into the CAM environment there, right? Hopefully, you guys now have a better understanding of the CAM patterns and some of the options, right? So like I mentioned, CAM patterns themselves aren't really too difficult to understand. It's just the options in there that sometimes throw or tend to throw people off, right? And then we have the effects of the operation, right? Order of how I mentioned the order by tool kind of rearranges your tool paths a little bit. So you guys want to be you want to be careful when posting out to your machine. All right, so at this point, if you guys have any questions, feel free to kind of throw them my way, if you will. So we have a question here from Robert asking if I can address the new UI tab experience in preview. UI tab experience. So let me see if I know what you're talking about here, Robert. Do you think you can clarify that a little bit? Let me go to preferences to make sure I'm not missing anything under the preview tab. UI preview. So that's I haven't even experienced or kind of played around with this, but let's see if that does anything to us actually. So let's see what that does. Changes the default UI to tabbed experience. Includes new terminology, visual treatment. All right, well let's try it. See if it does anything. Don't really see much happening. Yeah, so I'll have to look into that, see exactly what that means. To be honest with you, I didn't even know that preview existed. Yeah, so he's asking I have to restart. So let me go ahead and restart real quick. Let's see if that does anything. I'll save it for now. All right, yeah, I'm kind of curious to see if how many of you guys out there have actually tried that. I don't know exactly what that does. Maybe it just changes, the scheme a little bit, changes some terminology. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to see if you guys even like that, because I understand there's for the previous change, we just had a light color change here. Oh, okay, so yeah, so now this is much different. So this is interesting, right? So now you guys can see exactly what's going on here. We have sheet metal, design, render, animation, simulation. Wow, this is really interesting. Yeah, so now instead of the actual patch workspace, notice that they took that off. They now made it surface, which is, the terminology is a little bit more, I guess, intuitive now, right? Because patch didn't really mean anything. So now they actually split some of these up, or they combined them and they just made different tabs for them, right? So I guess it's just going to be up to user preference. If you guys want to try this out, again, thanks for that, Robert. But you go to you hit your drop down here, hit preferences, you go to preview, and then you go to UI preview, hit apply, hit OK, and then just restart Fusion 360. So give that a try. Maybe you'll like that a lot better, right? So hopefully doesn't really keep on crashing on you or something. But yeah, let us know what you think about that. We have another person here, Greg Morse. He's tried it out. He likes it so far. So just another more person that likes that, right? So actually don't mind it either. It looks pretty good. Then we have a question here from Brian. We have a question. So he's asking if the circular pattern would work with a fourth axis toolpath. So it would, right? So what we can do is we can, let's say we have some sort of a cylinder, and then we have a drilled hole on the top of it, right? And we need to make essentially just 4 instances around that cylinder. What you can do is use that circular pattern and then post out to your machine, right? So instead of especially if you guys have the HSM Ultimate or Fusion 360 Ultimate, right? And you want to, pattern that, and you have fourth axis capabilities, you don't have to necessarily use tool orientation for each individual one. Just use a circular pattern and then post out to your, to your machine. Again, it is going to be You do want to make sure that you have a fourth or fifth axis post capabilities. Otherwise, it's not gonna post out correctly, right? Yeah, so we have a lot of people here liking the new interface. So yeah, give it a try, guys. Let us know what you think. I'll give it a couple more seconds here for some more questions. But again, guys, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. We do have a survey at the end of the webinar, so if there's anything else that you want us to cover or maybe go a little bit more in depth, again, feel free to reach out and let us know what you want to see next. We're not really limited to what we can cover here inside of Fusion 360. So let us know if you want to see something that maybe you aren't too familiar with, and you want to see how we approach it. Just let us know, and we'll try to do a webinar for that. But with that, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So thank you guys again for tuning in. We'll catch you guys in 2 weeks at the same time. So with that, have a great weekend.